Live.
Good evening, namaste.
Yes.
So this is a distinct pleasure to make you aware and of the fact that today we are completing 7 months of continuous integrative health series. And what good way to make this, to mark this day when we are joined by Dr. Amit Ghosh. And I must confess that he's my mentor, a person who initiated me into molecular biology. The enthusiasm that he gave to me from his classes of transcription and translation still holds on. And in fact, one of the reasons we started biology for non-biologists was for you all, Ayush and yoga practitioners and healthcare workers and students to be inspired by the value of molecular biology, of how important it is for us to think cellular, molecular, as we think of wellness, as we think of health, as we think of disease, and as we think of interventions. So without much ado, I will request Dr. Manjari, who's the moderator of today's program, to take the program forward. And I will mute myself from now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So today today's talk is on Central Dogma translation, and today's speaker is Pooja Nadhulta, who has done her masters from Himachal Pradesh University, Summerhill, Shimla, and she is a PhD student at PGIMER. She is working on the effects of yoga on pregnancy. And with her, we'll also welcome our commentator for today's program, Professor Amit Ghosh, who is Chairperson, National Academy of Sciences, India, at the National Institute of Cholera and Entering Disease. Professor Ghosh is a former director, Institute of Microbial Technology, CSIR, Chandigarh, from 1998 to 2004. School of Biological Sciences, Indian Institute of Advanced Research, Ahmedabad, from 2005 to 2008. Emeritus Scientist, INSA, and Platinum Jubilee Senior Scientist, National Institute for Cholera and Enteric Diseases, Kolkata, and National Academy of Sciences, India, 2009 to 2016. He has been visiting scientist, National Institute of Health, Bethesda, USA, from 1987 to 1989. Dr. Ghosh's primary research interest is in the molecular biology and drug resistance to diarrheatic pathogens, with particular emphasis on Vibrio cholerae. He is associated with his collaborators at IICB and NICED Kolkata and has developed an oral recombinant vaccine for cholera using a novel strategy. It is also the first of its kind to be developed anywhere in the world outside USA and is patented in the USA and PCT's countries. His work on the molecular epidemiology of cholera has provided one of the first clues on how new clones of Vibrio cholerae can possibly emerge. He has published 100 scientific papers and had 4 international patents. Dr. Ghosh is a recipient of 1998 Ranbaxy Award, 2000 CSIR Shield of Process Technology, Lifetime Achievement Award of the Biotechnology Research Society of India, Lifetime Achievement Award of the Association of Microbiologists India, Millennium Plaque of Honor, Indian Science Congress Association 2019. He is a fellow of the Indian National Science Academy in Delhi, National Academy of Sciences Allahabad, Indian Academy of Sciences Bangalore, Biotechnology Research Society of India, West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology Kolkata, and a member of Guha Research Conference. He is currently the chief editor of PNAS India, Sector B. With this introduction, I warm-heartedly welcome Dr. Ghosh. Over to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you very much. So I would request Akshay to say a few words about this entire program you are running, and then I can make some comments.
Sure. Yeah, I was trying to tell the viewers that we are now completing 7 months of continuous integrative health education series, which started on the 22nd of March, 21st of March, and today is 20th. So we've had a lot of exchange of knowledge across disciplines, from Ayush to yoga to modern medicine to we had lots of sessions on yoga and lots of sessions on different Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, as well as on Tai Chi. People from across the world representing different editorial groups, different universities in India, across all the different length and breadth of the country. People have come and exchanged their ideas, inspired students. And our idea has been on this platform, Integrative Medicine Case Report, the unique journal which provides a venue for people, those who do not have access to ethical committees, who do not work in the institutional ecosystem, can, when they look at their patients, when the changes that they see, we encourage them to report that in the form of a case report by analyzing the data they take from the patient before they start the treatment and after they start the treatment. And we welcome them to submit that case report to our journal, which we subject to a standard peer review. The idea is to provide this information to people out there, as a lot of yoga clinics, yoga Ayush clinics are not able to report these findings because of the reason I mentioned. But we welcome that kind of a report. And in order to inspire this, we had started this program. And we are proud to say that today, on the seventh month completion, we have Dr. Amit Ghosh, who was former director, IMTech, and it takes me back to my memory lane when I was doing my master's in biotechnology. And he was the one who inspired me. And he was the one actually who told me what is the value of control. So at that time, I was just like a wayward person with lots of ambitions and enjoying biotechnology and trying to understand what it is. Then one day I stopped at his office and he said, he talked to me about the value of controls. And then I started thinking, and it made me contemplative. And the enthusiasm, must say, continues till date. And this was the very reason we thought of inviting him, and he readily agreed. Thanks to Dr. Ghosh, and welcome to this program, to talk on the central dogma, because that was the time going back to 1994 or so, so about 30 years, 114, yeah, almost 26 years back. This was transcription, I think he described, and in that particular Korenberg's experiments, I think he mentioned the value of controls. So I want you all to enjoy what he has to say, what he has to moderate, and I think I will give the stage back to Dr. Amit Ghosh to take over the moderation. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Akshay, for all the good words. This is what happens when the teacher talks about, student talks about a teacher usually. Thank you very much. Now, I think this is a very good program because you see there's a world out there, they're practicing a lot of things, which includes yoga also. But if you look at the fundamentals of life, the processes that govern them are pretty much the same. There is always a variation of the theme. Jacques Monod once said that what is true for E. coli is also true for elephants. We know that's not true, but the fundamental processes are the same. Now, you see the practitioners of yoga who are doing it, many of them doing very valuable work, but many of them may not be totally aware of the very basic fundamental processes that take life forward. And this idea of bringing them a little in the knowledge sphere of what happens in basic molecular biology, I think is a very good idea. I'll not take much time because I looked at Pooja's slides, they're very good. All I would like to say that if you look at human body or any animal, it's mostly proteins, you know. There's of course water, lipid and all of that. But everything that we do is controlled by enzymes. And what are enzymes? Are proteins, right? So what comes from parent to the progeny is a piece of molecule, which is DNA, which carries all the information. But it doesn't stop there. It comes and gets translated into action. Like you have some message and you send a, let's say, over the net, you send some, if you look at the actual code you'll see all kinds of garbled things there. But what you see in the screen is the end product, right? Here is also the same thing. So I think the idea is here to make people, I mean, we must apologize to people who already know all about this, but the people who may not be that aware of the fundamental process that is going on, the information gets transferred. I saw you had a lecture on transcription. Then you had Mithali talking about the information content of DNA. Now we are coming to a stage which will be done by Pooja, that how this information is eventually getting translated into proteins. And you know, basically all the reactions in the human bodies are by and large carried out by enzymes. And enzymes are nothing but proteins. So how this thing happens? And I think that is what Pooja is going to talk to us about. And I would suggest that she gives a talk. And in between, if people have questions, we can always take up from there. And at the end of our talk, if people ask questions, see, I just want to take 1 minute. I did some literature search. And of course, there's some work which talks about protein utilization and all that, how yoga is better than conventional exercise, but they are all at macro level. So this is what I was saying before we started in discussion with Akshay. The main problem is how do you take it back to a stage where you can correlate? Like, the many of the processes you can correlate at the molecular level, many of the other kinds of things. Here, the challenge is how do you do that? We all know that if you do yoga and do all of those things, you derive enormous benefit. But how do they go back? Because again, it boils down to the same question. We, from phenotype to from germline, germline is totally separate. How do you, will be the effect? Does it really affect you? It may not go to the next generation, but in the same generation, does it really create some problem at the very fundamental level? So those are the questions people one day would address, which you are trying to do right now. Excuse me. So that is the kind of thing, and in that context, I think this series is very good. Now it's over to you, Pooja. You please give your talk, but remember one thing: try to keep it simple, because the people who know, they know, but there are lots of people who are listening to it. They may not have any idea, So spend some time on your slides when you explain.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Are my slides visible, ma'am?
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's not visible. Yeah, we can see. Share it again, we cannot see.
Oh, okay.
Come to share. Share is option.
Ma'am, are the slide visible?
No, we can see your folders only. Unshare it.
Pooja, why
Unshare
don't you open the whole slide, PowerPoint, and keep it open in your desktop first, and then go there.
Hello. Yes, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you later?
While she is trying to figure that out, so we can continue maybe speaking. You said the importance of transgenerational effects, if that can be transferred into. I think you are muted, sir. We can't hear you. Sir, while she's trying to, no, yeah, she's trying to load it. We can continue chatting.
Okay.
What I was trying to reflect was that the importance that you gave to the transgenerational effects. Were you trying to say that if you do some yoga, well, that effect be transferred to the next generation? I think she's ready, so we can take that discussion forward. Yes, Pooja, you're all there.
So good evening, everyone. So my talk is on central dogma translation. As the central dogma, first part of central dogma, that is transcription, has already been discussed by Priya ma'am in one of the previous biology series talk. So I'm taking the second part of central dogma, that is translation. So translation is basically, so central dogma contains the two parts. First is transcription and second is translation. Translation is simply the DNA, the formation of RNA from DNA, and the protein, the formation of protein from RNA is known as the translation. So why the proteins, why this translation is needed, why DNA is needed to be converted into RNA, and then RNA is needed to be converted into the protein, because the proteins are the basic building blocks of every organism, and these keep the cells of our body and each organism cell to make them function what they do. So the instructions that are encoded in the DNA are are not understandable by the cells. So these information are translated into the protein. So this structure shows the basic central dogma process, that how double-stranded DNA is converted into single-stranded mRNA and then mRNA into the translation. So the products of transcription. So first step of central dogma transcription, mRNA, tRNA, and rRNA are formed. These are the three types of RNAs which will help in the translation process. So this transcription process takes place into the inside the nucleus of the cell, and from the nucleus, these three transcription products, that is mRNA, tRNA, and rRNA, come out of the nucleus to the cytoplasm of the cell. So in the cytoplasm, the translation process starts. So we will first discuss the genetic code. So genetic codes are the code of three base pairs which code for one amino acids. So amino acids are the basic building block of protein. Protein are made up of amino acids. Amino acid combine in a specific sequence, and then they form a polypeptide chain, and polypeptide chain then with some kind of modification form a protein. So in DNA there are so many these base pairs. Base pairs are simply four alphabets: A, U, A, C, T, G in case of DNA, and AUG, C in case of RNA. So when these alphabets combine in a specific manner, they code for a specific amino acids, which will further make a protein. So these are this figure shows arrangement of these four bases that code for a 20 amino acids. So these codes will help the translation of DNA material into the protein. So let's talk about the translation machinery. Translation machinery is a machinery of four components that helps the conversion of these four base pairs into amino acid sequence of 20 amino acid sequence. So this machinery generally contains mRNA, which acts as a template, tRNA, which carries the amino acid to the ribosome, amino acid tRNA synthesis, which will help the tRNA to carry the specific amino acid to the ribosome, and ribosome is a structure that on which this translation process takes place. So what happens when inside DNA, because DNA is a very long structure which contain large number of bases in it, but inside that there are so many small segments which are known as gene, and each particular gene codes for a particular protein. So each particular sequence inside that DNA which get transcribed into RNA, then RNA the three base pairs code for a single amino acids. So this is the process of protein formation, how protein formation takes place. From DNA segment, inside the DNA segment there is a gene, and from a gene mRNA is formed. mRNA contain a set of information, set of instructions. These set of instructions then code for a specific amino acid series. Then amino acid chain is formed. From amino acid chain, the polypeptide chain is formed, and from polypeptide protein is formed. So DNA is like a cookbook which contains so many recipes, and among which a particular cell what it need to function, that cell will choose a specific recipe for it in the form of DNA, in the form of RNA, and from RNA, a specific dish or specific protein will be formed on the basis of this recipe that RNA have picked up from DNA code group. So gene to protein process. So why? Because in all the cells of our body, same DNA is present, but every cell secrete, or every cell contain a different protein to function differently. So what happens? DNA, the information inside the DNA, there are lots of information inside the DNA that are locked inside the nucleus safely, and from nucleus, RNA contains some information to the to the cytoplasm in the form of mRNA, and in the cytoplasm, when this information reached, this protein is formed to work what the cell is actually needed to work. So this mRNA is transferred to the cytoplasm, and here the translation process takes place. So why this decoding is important, why this decoded is needed, as information, all the instructions, all the information is already present in the DNA and also in RNA, why this central dogma is needed. So in the cell, inside the cell, the information is present in the form of ACTG. Okay, so because cells are not capable of understanding the language of ACTG, so it is needed to be converted or translated into an understandable language which cell can understand. So same in if we refer to this picture, we cannot understand this specific what is written here, and we cannot figure out it, but when it is translated in the simpler language, we can understand and we can read it. Same happen in case of the cells. The ACTG sequence in the DNA is get translated so that in the form of protein, cells cells can easily understand that and do their further function, metabolism, growth, division, whatever cell function needed to do. So if we talk about the mRNA, because from DNA, mRNA will form, which actually contain the information, because there are we in the starting we talked about the three RNAs, which were mRNA, rRNA, and tRNA, among which mRNA is the main RNA which contain all the information. Although rRNA and tRNA are also important for the formation of protein, but the actual information is encoded in this mRNA region. So when the mRNA is mRNA travel from the nucleus to the cytoplasm, how does that ribosome, where the process starts, know that which is its starting side and which is its ending side? So mRNA will always be translated into 5' to 3' direction. So in the 5' direction, there is always a methylated cap present, and in 3' end there will be a poly A tail, which will also help the mRNA from degradation of any enzymes present in the cytoplasm, and it will also provide the directionality to the mRNA. So these are the ribosome which will recognize this methylated cap of mRNA. So it can know that from where the protein has to be started, and this ribosome itself contains the two unit, upper larger unit and lower smaller unit, which then will combine together to form a RNA machine. So this is a diagrammatic simple presentation how from nucleus to cytoplasm all process happen. mRNA will first combine with the ribosome, and from ribosome tRNA and other tRNA will come with the amino acid to make a polypeptide chain. So tRNA, first we studied about the mRNA, which contain the information to make a polypeptide chain. Second is tRNA, which helps in because amino acids are all present in the cells. So how do that how these amino acids reach to the ribosome? So these are the tRNA, which helps in transferring the amino acid from outside to the ribosome or sequence it according to the sequence of according to the sequence of mRNA. So it also contain the different specific site. This is the attachment site or acceptor stem on which this is the site where the amino acid will attach. This is the site which will attach to the mRNA, so that the further process of translation can be process of translation can be processed. So how that transport of amino acid occur from tRNA to the tRNA. So there is an enzyme called amino acid tRNA synthetase, which help in the transferring the amino acid to the tRNA. So what happens first, amino acid got attached to this tRNA synthetase enzyme, and here this amino acid first will be get activated by ATP. Then this activated amino acid will detach from this adenosine ATP adenosine, and after that tRNA will come and join here in this enzyme amino acid tRNA synthesis. The complex of tRNA and amino acid will be formed, and once this complex is formed, this complex will get detached from this amino acid tRNA synthesis. So this enzyme is now free; it can go to recruit another amino acids from us. So this is the process. This site is a smaller subunit of ribosome. This is larger subunit of ribosome. A larger subunit of ribosome contains the 3 site, P site, A site, and E site, on which different functions take place. So this tRNA first will carry a specific amino acid. This tRNA will then get attached to the mRNA. After attaching to the mRNA, each amino acid will make a chain, and the free tRNA will get exited from the E site. So there are the 3 processes involved in the translation. First is initiation, where the whole complex is formed, mRNA, tRNA, amino acids, and ribosomal unit form a translational machinery. Second is elongation, where tRNA come and come with specific amino acids and form a chain. And third step is termination, where the process of protein formation get halted once it reaches to the stop codon. So this is a simple picture of this ribosome. The small this is the mRNA from 5' to 3', and the lower side is this the smaller subunit of ribosome. Upper side is larger subunit of ribosome. This larger subunit contains the A site, P site, and E site. So what will happen? This tRNA will carry a specific amino acid here, and as we have in the previous slide I talked about the genetic code. So the genetic code which codes for this specific amino acid, this will be attached to the tRNA, and this tRNA will come here. First tRNA will attach to the P site here, the middle side of the larger subunit of mRNA. This anticodon region will then then make a bond or code with the mRNA. Here the first amino acid will be recruited. The second tRNA will come and join the ribosome here at the A site. Then what will happen? The amino acid here at the A site and P site will combine with each other, and this tRNA will shift to the E site. Okay, so when it is shifted to the A site, it is now free, because this amino acid has already been incorporated with the another amino acid of which contains at the tRNA of A site. So this will exit from this side, E site. So these are the 3 sites for you can remember it by activated site, polypeptide site, where the polypeptide formation takes place, activated where the new tRNA come and then you tRNA get recruited and E site is exit site, where the free tRNA got exited from the this translational machine. So this is the loop how this process takes place. This tRNA will come and bind, and then another tRNA will come here at the A site, and the whole polypeptide will form, and after the whole polypeptide is formed, the translation process is completed. So the polypeptide is the final product of translation. Although the polypeptide chain is not a protein, protein is formed after having so many modification in the polypeptide chain. Polypeptide chain get undergo so many foldings and other modification which form a final functional protein. This is the end product. Polypeptide chain is the end product of translation, which is a sequential chain of amino acids in which the mRNA was formed from the DNA, from the segment of DNA which is known as the gene. So this mRNA got transcribed from a specific segment of DNA known as gene, and this is translated into a specific sequence of amino acids which will further form a protein. So how once the protein is formed, so what happens, how protein target to a particular organelle inside inside the cell. So in this process there are the two processes for the translocation of this polypeptide chain. First is co-translational translocation, and second is post-translational translocation. As the name suggested, co-translational translocation means when the translation is happening at the same time, polypeptide chain get translocated into the organelle where it is needed. So here you can see that this is mRNA, these are the ribosomes, and this is polypeptide chain in making. So a polypeptide chain contains a specific signal at its head region, which target it to a particular organelle of a cell where it is needed. So during translation, it gets translocated inside the endoplasmic reticulum. From endoplasmic reticulum, where it forms a protein by special folding with the help of many proteins inside the endoplasmic reticulum. After endoplasmic reticulum, it got translocated into Golgi apparatus, and from Golgi apparatus, plasma membrane, it got translocated to the plasma membrane and lysosome. This is the one process of co-translational translocation for plasma membrane and lysosome. And the second is post-translational translocation, where once the polypeptide chain is formed, after that it got translocated to the different kind of organelle. So here are the some studies which shows that how yoga and physical activity affect the protein and other inflammatory markers which are also proteins inside the body, and some wellness markers, how yoga can yoga increase these wellness marker or decrease this wellness marker, inflammatory marker or not. So first study shows that the after doing yoga, whole body protein utilization, that is a balance between protein synthesis and protein breakdown, increases after practicing yoga in healthy women. And the second study shows that after practicing yoga, the blood glucose level got decreased and insulin marker increased as compared to the control groups who does not perform yoga. And this third study shows that the stress and inflammation markers also decrease or come in balance after doing some kind of yogic practices. IL-6, TNF alpha, and other inflammatory markers were reported to be decreased in this kind of studies after practicing yoga as compared to the control group who were not practicing yoga. So this study also shows the same result, that during stress, the inflammation inside the body increases. Stress affect endocrine system, immune system, nervous system, and both. And imbalance between these system cause the disease. And yoga, because stress affect the HPA axis, that is hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. And this can be because of stress, this HPA axis get hyperactivated, and yoga and physical activity balance the HPA axis and decrease this stress markers inside in the blood level. So, another wellness marker is the serum C-reactive protein (CRP), which is a non-specific inflammatory marker, which increase in a healthy lifestyle, which increase in unhealthy lifestyle, and which decrease with the obesity, which decrease with the healthy lifestyle. So this studies shows that the yoga also have some effect on this inflammatory markers that are produced by stress and other kind of diseases. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooja. So, coming back to what Pooja very elegantly explained, and connecting to the final slides about the paper she showed, this is what I was talking about in the beginning. See, all these things are physiological manifestations. The question is, these physiological manifestations, how they get back to the molecular level. And there the real problem comes, because if you look at all the papers, they all talk about the physiological response. Now, question is, do these physiological responses go back in some way that you have a problem, or rather you have a control over the gene expression, and from there it alters the entire process of transcription translation? That is the gap. And the only way probably one can try to see is you can do a microarray experiment. That's the only way you can do. Let's say, but that was what I was saying, that how do you do it? Because in animals you can do it. But in a human being, how do I going to get a microarray profile? I mean, many of these things in the animal kingdom, what is done is you look at what are the genes that get transcribed, what are the genes that get activated, gets down regulated. How do you do it in case of animals? I mean, in human beings. In animal, for example, rat put in stress condition, the rolling wheel and all that. And after that, you look at the transcription profile. From there, you get an idea which are the genes which are overexpressed, which are underexpressed. And obviously, if the gene is overexpressed, corresponding proteins will be more. But when you try to bring it in the realm of joke, this is where the real problem comes in. How do you do it? Because you cannot, I mean, if you take a cell out of my body and you do some microarray experiments, so you have to basically do work with the cell lines. And there, you cannot, I mean, unlike other things where you have a control of how do you control the system. You give heat, you give shock, you give this and that here. So this bridge, unless this bridge is crossed, I mean, this gap is bridged, there is going to be a problem. And you mentioned that many of the mainstream journals don't even send it for review, is because of this reason, that all the papers she has said in the beginning, I've looked at some of those papers also, basically they've got to do with human physiology compared to what you do a conventional exercise versus what you do if you practice yogic exercise. That's at the physiological level. But what you are trying to do, or it will be really the good thing to do, if it can take them back to the cellular level. And for other things, for other kinds of signals, this is done usually with micro experiments as the easiest thing to do. But here the problem comes. How do you send a yogic exercise signal to a cell? You can think about giving heat, you can think about giving UV, you can do all kinds of things. This is where the real problem comes, and that is why it is so tough. So if somebody can think about it, how, let's say when they did the entire experiment of, C. elegans, many of the things they did, because they could sort of translate into that kind of a situation. Or for example, most of the time you do a mouse experiment, because it's not, mouse are not like human beings, but there's a lot of similarity at the level. So you can, because they have no human rights or no mouse rights, you can subject them to all kinds of tortures and all kinds of things, and then look at how the expression is taking place, what is happening. You can even go back to the genetic level, and obviously, as I mentioned, if a particular gene is overexpressed, it means protein will be more. So that is a direct proof that this stress or whatever the signal that you are giving has a direct consequence at the protein level. But here the difficulty comes because you don't have a model. So if one can develop a model, I don't know how, then this gap will be bridged, and like a lot of experiments which are just not physiological experiments, but experiments at the molecular level, that can be done. So this is the comment I would like to make.
That's very nice. And let's see if anybody wants to react to this, since Pooja did a lot of research and she put up translation slides trying to explain the various complicated and yet so organized cellular efforts which are happening within a cell. So, you have any insights, Pooja, of how you will address the questions raised by Dr. Ghosh? Any wild thought, or it could be a cross question?
Sir, at genetic level, it will be difficult to see in that how yoga affect because it is difficult to change the sequence which is already there in DNA.
His question was how to reduce the, or how to probe the effects of yoga or exercise at a cellular level. So, can you think of engineering a experiment or a model where what you explain through translation slides can be probed or assessed, right? Like you also mentioned in one of the papers that the IL-6 levels were found reduced after yoga intervention or yogic exercise.
Yes, sir.
So does that give you a hint? How will you? Why you? Let us start asking you why the IL-6 levels are going down. What may be happening at the cellular level?
So, because the inflammation, because the main organelle or main cell which is producing these inflammatory markers may have stopped their function.
Stop. So the word is stopped. So what could that stopping be? You already explained it.
Some kind of hormones which are releasing after these practices of yoga, and
so stopping may be just
stopping or balancing. It may be, because stopping will be a wrong word. It may be a balancing.
Manjari, you want to come in and define the term stop here?
Sir, I would like to comment that the yoga practices which involves basically calming of the body and the mind. So when you give your when you sleep, you are giving your body to rejuvenate to a new day. See, in a similar fashion, when you do yoga or meditation, you are giving your mind and body to settle down, to decrease the stress levels, and so that thereby automatically the toxic compounds which are released in the body, such as the oxidants, which are the levels goes down, and this causes the genetic alterations. It is not that yoga is directly affecting at the cellular level, but it is causing the decrease in amount of the toxic level in the body, so that the genetic influences can happen.
So I lost you for most of the time because there was an internet problem from my side, I think. But I think Dr. Ghosh also exited, but he's back. So we were posing a question, sir, that one of the papers showed IL-6 levels went down. So I was asking Manjari, what could be happening at IL-6 level? Was it that the IL-6 translation is being affected? Is it the the stability of the IL-6 for some reason is being altered by yoga intervention? But how to know that? So Dr. Ghosh said that to know that exactly, we will need a model or a cellular system which can mimic the processes exerted by or the effects exerted by yoga. Dr. Ghosh, can this
I'm
be a...
sorry. I mean, something went wrong and everything screen became down.
That's okay. That's okay. We were discussing further the paper that Pooja showed, the IL-6 levels went down. So I was asking Manjari if these levels went down, is it due to disruption of translation or whether it is due to the decreased stability of the translated IL-6 level? So those questions we can only answer if we have, as you said, a model in which we can dissect these mechanisms, and a model where we can give the effects apparently exerted by yoga or any Ayush system. So can we create a hypoxia in a cell line, which is some people argue, some investigators argue that hypoxia is intermittent hypoxia is created when you do breathing exercises and you hold breath and you alternate between one nostril and the other. And if we have a hypoxia induced cell line in a hypoxic chamber, and if we can see what changes happen over hypoxia in 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, and then another experiment in which we add the serum of the yoga practitioner into this hypoxia induced cell line, and then study what is the IL-6 level by using inhibitors of translation or adding inhibitors of transcription. So can this kind of a cellular system partly address the questions you have raised? Was I audible, sir?
Yeah, I'm see
Yeah.
again, but that's again, you see, okay, you create a hypoxic condition in a cell line and you find that there is some anomaly the way the translation is happening. But translate that into the whole body is a big problem. Because you all know that, let me give an example. When a person dies, the person is dead. The cells are not dead. You can always take a cell out of that. And in fact, Hayflick showed that a normal cell line will have a lifetime of 140 generations. Afterwards, it dies. So all the cell lines that you are working with in the laboratory are actually oncogenic cell lines. That's why they're immortal, like HeLa cells, for example. So again, the same thing happens. I mean, you see it in a cell. How do you take it into the macro level? I gave you this example. I mean, if a person dies, the heart is donated, your eyes are donated because they're all alive. You can, they are not dead. At the same time, the person is dead. So suppose you find some hypoxic condition, some anomaly in this whole business. To translate that into a situation where a cell is a neighborhood of other cells, also depending upon where in your body. So if it is a liver cell, or for example, a skin cell, it regenerates it all the time. But there are liver cells that don't, they just don't, they are there. But if you take them out and put in something, they may grow. But in the native condition, they don't. So that's where the problem comes, because the other regulators are there in the body, which you do not have in a simple cell line. all you have is a contact inhibition. But you know that contact inhibition doesn't work in case of oncogenic cells. They'll grow one above the other. So that's where the problem is, that even if you do a reductionist approach, the milieu in which a particular cell is there, so many things has an influence on it. And depending upon the totality, the ultimate manifestation comes. And here, the problem is, what will be the signal for yogic exercise? You know, if you take heat, you take all of those, you are under control. But yogic exercise, how do you translate into something which is a physical signal which you can control? Only way, you know, somebody do yoga exercise, you take out a cell and look at it. But translating it into a scenario where it has an impact on the whole body, that's why, you know, all the papers she showed, you see, they have got to do with the physiology. So the main thing is, if somebody, like once upon a time, people knew that many of the mouse or the animal models are there, people could never think that they could be created. For obese mouse, onco mouse, they have been created. Similarly, if somebody can create a model system which can simulate something, which, how to put it, I mean, I do yoga exercise, okay? And certain things happen, some physiological parameters. If you can find out those physiological parameters through some signals, it's an indirect way. That I do yogic exercise, you look at some physiological parameters, and then you try different kinds of signals, you find that a particular signal gives rise to similar kind of physiological parameters in an animal. Then that is some kind of a model. Till then, correlation, you know, that's why it's such a tough problem. That's the reason.
Sure, sure. So let's see, Manjari, if you have other students' questions for Dr. Ghosh or Pooja.
Please put up your questions.
Questions, comments. The yoga scholars are here working on prison studies, on high altitude. Any of you can, this is a wonderful opportunity. And you know, Dr. Ghosh taught me one thing which I keep telling in so many meetings, but I probably only once or twice told me this, that there is nothing like a stupid question. That is what he used to tell me. Yeah, this is what I learned from him. Yes, Sheetal.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, as ma'am said, Manjari ma'am was explaining about this and said that it might be because of the toxins getting lowered down while doing yoga, and that is affecting IL-6.
First of all, you identify yourself and then go a little slowly.
Okay, sir. Good evening, sir. My name is Sheetal, and I work under, I'm a S. Vyasa student from yoga, and I'm with Akshay sir since last 1 year. And I'm working on high altitude project with him. My question is that, as Manjari ma'am was talking about, that how IL-6 is affected is because of the toxin levels done by yoga, and because of yoga, the toxin levels reduces. So how can we measure the toxin levels, maybe through the molecular? Is that possible, or what can be done? Maybe.
Yeah,
So
toxin.
Yeah.
You are asking to me?
Yes, I guess so.
No, it's a general question, like how we can do that the toxins, like whoever, that as you're saying, the toxins are reduced, and therefore because of yoga the toxins are reduced, and therefore it is affecting IL-6. So how we can measure the toxin levels? Otherwise,
basically I was talking about the oxidative species, and that can be measured. And we can have two sets, like you can have a yoga group who has been practicing yoga from a longer period of time, and the one set which has a sedentary lifestyle, and there we can measure the levels of ROS in the plasma. You can easily measure it. Also you can measure the antioxidants and other you can also see these levels and then compare whether the levels are different in the yoga practitioners or in the sedentary lifestyle. Said that, there will be some cofactors which will also be affecting because it's lifestyle related. Yoga is lifestyle related. So the cofactors, the difference is age and sex will actually is going to put some influences on the level of such markers. The other way of doing it is that you do a follow-up study that should be not like just for 3 months or 4 months. It should be of many years, so that you start with say 10 subjects and they started doing yoga. As sir was saying, you can do a microarray to identify that particular molecular mechanism which is actually changing the physiology of the body. So what I think of, that you start with 10 subjects, do their microarray initially, and they start doing yoga, and they become a very good practitioners of say 7 to 8 years, and you can do these microarrays at say for example for 2 years of time, and you can just compare within themselves and see that how this yoga practice with time is changing their epigenetics.
Any comments on this?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment. Comment here is, theoretically what you say is possible, but in practice it's going to be awfully difficult, because how do you find a proper control? That I used to emphasize all the time when I used to teach. When you compare two people, you have to look at the other parameters as well. The general state of health, all kinds of things. And unless they very closely match, then this comparison will always come into question. That is number one. So as I said, on paper it's very easy, but in reality it's very tough. If you have twins, let's say, and they have grown up under identical condition, then you have come close, somewhat close. Even then it's not 100%. Second point, the microarray of what? See, when you do in a bacteria or a cell line, then you have a system. But how do you going to do a microarray? Are you going to take out some cells from the body and then see how the expression changes as a result of, let's say, 5 years of yoga experiment? Cells from where? The physiologically, the same cells, when they differentiate, depending upon where they are in the body, their expressions are completely different. So what cells are you going to pick up? So those questions come into play. Are you going to pick up 100 cells, for example, from liver, from brain, from skin, and make a comparison? So that's why I said that in principle, this is a thought experiment, which is good. But if you want to run it into the field, it's very tough. Two levels of difficulty, as I mentioned. First is, when they do this trial studies, for example, vaccine trial or any trial, they do a very close match. But there also the difficulty is less, because you are giving a vaccine. And there you are saying that how, and you take a statistically valid number and look at it. Here, you are going to study them, let's say, after 5 years, as you mentioned, that it's not to happen overnight. So 5 years, they have to go through the same kind of a lifeline, so to say. If it is a much variation, then I'll always ask you, how do you know it is because of this and not because of that? So that is one problem. Second problem is, when you do a microarray of the cells, which cells do you talk about? Which cells you take?
Those could be lymphocytes, peripheral blood cells.
So Akshay, the peripheral blood cells are not anyway very good.
Right, but that's the only thing we can do.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying now. And whether that will directly relate, again, the question of the physiology comes in here. The biggest difficulty of these sorts of experiments is, the same thing happened in case of molecular biology 50, 60 years ago. We didn't have even today, many diseases are intractable because you don't have an animal model. Unless you have a model, you cannot really get to the next step. That's why even regular diseases, you have systems where people have not been able to make much progress because there is no animal model. And you cannot do this experiment. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Will that not also apply to diet intervention studies also?
Yes. See, so diet intervention studies, if you look at it, even the way the stools, because the problem is, like, if you are talking about two human beings, unless you are able to keep them in very, very controlled condition, so many other factors come into play. So
I have a suggestion of coming to prisons or military where they are in the barracks or in the long-term prisoners who are going to stay and probably take the same food and probably have the same routine for 5 years at least if they are going to be convicted for that long. Is that a solution? Part solution?
yeah, see, even in the military, if you look at the soldiers, first of all, when they're taken in, they have to follow fit in certain conditions. So you can think they're somewhat similar. Then if you look at the units, in our country at least you have units based on similarities. You have a Naga regiment. So their growing up was pretty much similar. They eat the same kind of food. That's the point I'm trying to make. And there what you are doing, you are looking at overall parameters. But here you are trying to correlate it to the molecular level. If you compare the physiological parameters, it's not difficult. I mean, it may not be very easy, but it's not difficult. All the papers Pooja showed are physiological parameters. It is possible to do it. But we were talking about how do you take it back to the molecular level, which has been done in many cases. See, again, I'm coming back, repeated again. What are microarray experiments? Why they have become so powerful? Because they translate the whole thing to a molecular level. You give some heat shock, you want to see, you give some heat shock, and there is some change in physiological level. You go to the microarray level, you immediately know which are the genes which got overexpressed or underexpressed. Because heat you can control.
Yeah, but we can do before and after study, if not between, n on one trial, like the same person before and after an interview. Let us say pregnancy, for example.
No, that's what I'm saying. So same person, today you do it, and then that person practices yoga, and later on you look at the physiological parameters. What cells are you going to take? If you take the peripheral blood cells, they are very simple. I mean, you don't get a whole lot of information. You have to go to more complicated cells. So their problem that I'm maybe 10 years down the line, you yourself will discover a method to do it. But right now, what I'm saying is the reason you don't have many practitioners in this area because the complexity and the difficulty of the problem. Something very similar in case of consciousness. Let's say, let me digress here a little bit. Two schools of thought. The main problem is whether you can, translate a first person experience to third person experience. If I take a Rasgulla, does it taste the same to me or same to Akshay, let's say? The one group of scientists say that we will find a brain scan and we'll find what are the areas of the brain that light up. So association studies. But the other group says it still doesn't explain the problem. Because unless you are able to stimulate those areas and generate, what is the standard for your test? How do you measure it? Somewhat similar problems here also come. That's what I said. Sooner or later, people will find, maybe your laboratory will find a way to handle this problem. But right now, you see most papers in the physiology level because of this reason.
Thank you for bringing that up to the attention, and it makes us all alert and more investigative rather to come up with a model where we can actually go down to the level of the slides that Pooja showed, at the level of translational mechanisms she showed, how translation happens, protein targeting happens, how the amino acids are attached and they together make a polypeptide. From Sheetal, Manjari, you want to call on other people and look at the Facebook if there are questions simultaneously? Maybe for 4 or 5 minutes we can make use of Dr. Ghosh's presence.
So, sir, there is one question from Facebook by Dr. Kaushal Sharma. So he is saying that we hypothesizing that geographical distribution may have different epigenetic status or regulation based on environmental exposure to maintain the physiological homeostasis, even may have even may have different response towards a common pathological conditions.
Repeat that question. Your voice broke, so I couldn't. So
okay, so I'll read once again.
Yeah.
The question is, are we hypothesizing that her geographical distribution may have different epigenetic status or regulations based on environmental exposure to maintain the physiological homeostasis, even may have different response towards a common pathological conditions?
Well, I'll give you a very simple example. It does. You and I go to somebody's marriage, take the same food. I come down with diarrhea, the other person does. So, the geographical means that when you are in a particular condition, say that things are changing, but just if I am here and I go to Chandigarh, things do not change that much. But the other factors come into play. And those factors definitely influence, but again, ultimately it will come down to what I am. That's why I gave you that very simplistic example. See, like for example, you probably know 30% people are not responsive to any antibiotics. You and I take antibiotic, it gives us the desired effect. But 30% people are just impervious to it. So that is a kind of situation. Now, it means that if you go and, let's say, if I take another example, connecting to pathology. Americans who are born after, I think, 60s, they don't have any Helicobacter pylori in their gut. We all have. And before, who were born before that, they also had it. Why? Because of the hygiene, general hygiene condition. They became a lot more conscious. I mean, so many diseases went away. And Helicobacter pylori is a very good example. An American born, let's say 10 years ago, he doesn't have any Helicobacter pylori in the gut. Why? It's because that person is born and grown in an environment where this bug doesn't get an opportunity to, make the gut, make the person's gut as its habitat. So it does affect, sure. I mean, if you have a relative who's in US and Canada, is there for many, many years, when he comes to Chandigarh and tries some Golgappa, he has a problem. The same guy, when he grew up here, didn't have any problem. But today he has. Why? Because sitting in that scenario, in that condition, his body has grown into a different kind of an environment where the food that he's taking, water that he's taking, is basically devoid of all of these things. So body adapts to that condition. You come back here after a gap of 10 years, if you are visiting intermittently, it's different. I have relatives who have come here after 30 years, and first day, first meal, they have a problem. Same guy were here for first 30 years of his life, nothing happened. So it does affect.
So that should apply to Dr. Ghosh, sir. It will apply to treatment strategies all across the spectrum. Treatment for cancer will vary person to person. The treatment to infectious diseases, COVID-19 vaccine may also vary from one person to the other person to the other person, because everybody is different and their constitution is different, their genetics is different, and their gut microbiota is also different.
True.
As much for yoga intervention as for response to treatment as well.
True, but Akshay, you, of course, that is discredited. I'm not discredited. That's not. See, entire microbiome, people were divided into 3 groups based on their gut microbiome. But then it was found this study was mostly confirmed to Europe, so it's not valid. Today, a Naga person's microbiome is very different from let's say, a so-called high-caste Brahmin who is only used to vegetarian food. Point I was trying to make is, but they're all within a range. What you are talking about is within a range. The same thing I was saying, that the same person, depending upon where he or she finds himself or herself, for a long time, certain changes take place, physiological changes. One thing you will notice, that if you have families who migrated to USA, their children usually always have a better health than their parents. You might have noticed that taller.
Yeah.
Why? It's simply because of the hygienic condition. Coming back to our original point, the question is how do you take it back to the molecular level? That is the fundamental question we are discussing in today's talk.
Correct.
Physiological level, of course, you can do. I mean, people have done experiments. You yourself have papers in that physiologically exercise versus yoga and all that, you see a difference. But we were talking about how do you take it to the molecular level.
Yeah.
And that this lecture series is,
Precisely.
talking about absolutely at the molecular level.
Sure,
So
sure.
one of the ways I was thinking that, okay, if you can, I mean, military will be a good example. You can follow them up, and these are again very long term, or you try to find out what are the things, let's say you put some, I don't know, I'm just talking through my hand. You are a neurologist, so you
please go ahead. Yeah.
put some probes, and what kind of impulses or whatever you get. Try to find out if your mouse will have the same kind of brain light up, giving this X, Y, Z kind of signal. If Y signal gives some similarity with what you found in the human cortex is lighting up, then that particular signal you can think of as coming somewhat close to the yoga signal. But is that kind of experiment possible? I don't know.
Yeah, there was one paper I'm not able to recall, but I'll send it to you. Somebody tried to shoot a laser. They did they tried to mimic meditation. I don't recall. We did it in a journal club. Parul, do you remember that paper we discussed in our journal club, if you are there? But yeah, people have tried that, what you are saying, to mimic the same symptoms so that it becomes a good model for meditation or yoga or something like. I understand what you're saying. Manjri, if we have time, can we take one question? Or I think
no, but let me just Akshay add one thing.
Sure.
Even there are some Canadian work which has shown that even the question of spirituality, you can stimulate certain areas of the brain. But my point I'm trying to make is, suppose you get some signals like that as a result of yoga. Now you have a mouse model and you try different signals and you find what signal will light up the same areas. Then you can think that signal for that particular animal model is coming. I mean, is a broad simulation of yogic signal. That you can, if you can do. That's what I was saying.
I think
Sir Prashant has a question.
Prashant, please introduce yourself and then you can ask.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I am Prashant and I am doing my PhD.
Your voice is breaking.
Your voice is breaking up. Can you put off your video and ask? And you can ask English, Hindi, whatever.
Okay, sir. Sir, now is it okay?
No.
Or I chat?
No.
Okay, sir.
Can you type it down in the chat box? Then Manjari will read it out.
Sir, I am typing. Okay.
Any other question, Manjari?
So what happened? What was his question? I couldn't follow.
He is typing.
He's typing it down. Yeah, his voice was breaking down. So I know the question was, the discussion was around bringing it down to molecular level, but Dr. Kaushal again comes to Facebook to ask once again that what about diseases that are complex diseases such as macular degeneration, Alzheimer's, where environmental factors continue to contribute equally with the genetic architecture. How would we manage these diseases for different environmental exposure?
If I could answer that question, I'll get a Nobel Prize. Problem is, but certain pointers are known. Say, for example, people have found that you take, lead, for example, enhances it. So, but people really have not found out what exactly triggers this. Recently, I saw a paper where they say that there are some early signals which you can find out. But what is those early signals correlation with environment or food habit? That has not been established. I mean, those are very complex things. Let us take a very simple thing. You know, if you go to Okinawa Island, you will find so many people above 100 years of age. Why? Why you find in that particular island people maximum number of centenarians? Why? Nobody knows the answer, you know, because they eat the same food as the rest of the Japanese. So those questions are very difficult to answer. Not that they should not be attempted or people are not trying to do. People are trying to do. And the question is the answers are coming very slowly. The reason is very simple because of the complexity of the problem. Even for infectious diseases, you see, I work on cholera. Let me give an example. Cholera is a very simple disease. You ingest Vibrio cholerae, toxin generates, you get a diarrhea. Why till today there is not a single vaccine against that? Why? What is the problem? You know, on paper it's such a simple disease. Only cure people have conquered through hygiene. So point I'm trying to make is, you know, some of the things where the many multifactorial things are very difficult. See, once upon a time, people thought cancer is the same thing. Now, you know, it's not one disease. It's a whole lot of, a whole bunch of disease, depending upon what kind of cancer you have. You may die tomorrow or you may live for 10 years or 20 years. So these answers are slowly unfolding. But again, wherever you have many factors coming into play for a particular cause, it becomes very difficult.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that one cannot.
Prashant has given his question. So he's asking, there are so many athletes who practice in high altitudes or wearing a special mask. They said it increases their red RBCs count and stamina in human body. What is the mechanism behind this? Is it good?
I think Akshay is a better person to answer that. I really don't know the answer. But all I can tell you, you see, when the Chinese first overtook, or I mean, I just took over Tibet, you know, and they wanted to people it with Han Chinese. They're just dying, you know, because of certain problems, and now they have been able to solve it. But what exactly is causing this, I don't know. Akshay, do you have an answer to this? Because you have worked with
I would think of hypoxia again, and it activates the regenerative capacity. It also activates, it's known to activate VEGF, HIF, the transcription factor responsible for angiogenesis, neurogenesis, that's one. And also partly conditioning, also the conditioning.
So when you acclimatize a person, do these factors change?
Of course.
Has to, right? Otherwise, you know, they will not survive.
Yeah,
right?
so they change, obviously. That is what is called preconditioning. It's also called ischemic preconditioning. And that actually, that's why the athletes go there, and that in minimal oxygen after acclimatization, they try to run and build their stamina. And apparently the RBC count has also been reported to go up. And even the LDL level, you know, the cholesterol levels also shoot up. Although the PO2 levels, the oxygen level drop, but there is a the body mounts a compensatory response, which activates its system. And in that way, the exact molecular mechanism, I do not know. To the extent I know is the HIF, which is a transcription factor for VEGF, which is involved in angiogenesis, gets activated.
Yeah, there's a guy called Ashraf. He has done some work on this and published a paper in PNAS. See, this relates to an earlier question. See, this is a very good example of environment's influence on a particular person's health and other kinds of things. Same soldier, after acclimatization, does not suffer from liver edema, lung edema, or anything like that. Same person in a different environment. You have taken the body a time to adjust to itself. So it does influence, but the question is to what extent. And this particular now reminds me, this paper by this gentleman, I think his name is Ashraf. He has done some work with the military, and he has done some molecular studies of what happens when you go to high altitudes, what kind of cellular changes take place. But again, I will come back to again which was your fundamental question. How do you take it back to the molecular level, you know, level of the DNA expression and things like that.
Sure. Manjari, you want to add on because you have worked on high altitude, and then you can decide when to close and say bye-bye to everyone.
Yes, sir. So the effects of high altitude is different on different people. It depends on the complexity of the genetic background which you are having. But the athletes and not all athletes would react in a similar fashion. If you talk about the adaptation or per se, I would say acclimatization. The acclimatization of our body is designed in such a way that it tries to acclimatize to the environmental changes. When you go at the high altitude, the unavailability of oxygen itself is a stimulus for our body to acclimatize towards it. And for that, HIF1 alpha is activated, and which transcribes the downstream mechanism to increase the RBC count, to increase the vascularization, to increase so that the more and more oxygen is available to the tissues, and there is no deficiency or hypoxia created at the tissue level. When you are giving an intermittent hypoxia, what happens? You are trying to acclimatize the body slowly. When you give a persistent hypoxia, then a person who is susceptible of acquiring these kind of high altitude diseases, that might come to that. But when you give an intermittent hypoxia, they try to acclimatize in a better way, in a slow fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was saying. See, look at the army. You know, I mean, they do a particular screening. I know this for sure. That when they decide, they do a screening, because not every soldier, doesn't matter how much that person you acclimatize that person, will be able to survive and fight in that condition. So, for example, we have our Ladakh scouts. They're very good in high altitude, kind of a regimentation warfare kind of situation. Once we were in Leh, and we heard a lieutenant colonel, there's a lady, her name was Himoshi or something. She was saying that doesn't matter, they have the prior screening, because not a soldier may look very tough and everything, but his adaptability to that condition may not be as good as somebody else who comes from the same background. So what you said is absolutely correct. I was not saying that everybody can be into food. There is always a window through which you operate. But what I was trying to say that it is also an indirect proof of your environmental effect on your human body, or for that matter, how your body adapts to it. But this person, if I remember correctly, tried to link it to some molecular work. I have published a paper, and often I cannot remember, but I can send you the reference later. But here again, I thought.
Are you talking about apelin?
Talking about?
Apelin molecule.
Aging molecules?
Apelin.
Yeah, could be. As I said, now I read that paper, so I've forgotten everything about it. But point I'm trying to make is, again, if we try to take the effect of yoga at the molecular level, there is a gap which you have to breach. Because physiological levels you can do, no problem. But the moment you want to go to the molecular level, you want to see what genes are hyperexpressed or not hyperexpressed and all of that, the main problem is you just can't do it with a human being, because so many regulatory measures are there. They won't even allow you to do many experiments. So that is where the problem comes. Like, if I digress a little, many of the vaccines today will never have gotten approval if they are done today. Smallpox, polio, I mean, they would not have gone through the kind of regulatory measures you have in place today. So whenever you are trying to talk about a human volunteer or anything, the problems are almost insurmountable.
Great.
So that's what I
think
say.
we have a very interesting discussion and interaction, and the message is very clear that we need to discover a model where we can unravel and unmask the experience that we experience as yoga practitioners, to bring it down to the molecular level, and that way we will bring it to par, probably at the analogous to what the drug trials are, and more acceptable for integration, maybe as a prescription at the healthcare settings. So with that, I would like to really thank Manjari and the other people.
I just want to make one final comment,
Sure.
Akshay, if you permit me to.
Sure, sir.
See, why don't you, because if you have people practicing yoga with similar background and similar food habit, why don't you take a look at their microbiome? It would be an interesting thing to do and highly doable.
Very nice idea. We are
Because, there you don't have this difficulty. Again, you have to find the right kind of people, similar background, similar food habits, and of course, over the years. But it is a doable experiment. It's a kind of a thing. If you find that, that adds to, because right now, from simple overall health to brain signal, so many things are being related to our gut microbiome. So whether that.
But why do you think that the yoga will have any impact on the gut microbiota?
I mean, it's just a wild idea, but I'm
Right.
saying that it is kind of because here you can do with human subjects, not a problem.
Right. It can be one sample that can be worked on, easy to take, less ethical issues. And we had a talk by Rob Friedland, who is in touch with us from University of Louisville, who works on microbiota, and he has actually proposed that the gut microbiota has a linkage to Alzheimer's disease and pre-Alzheimer states, and which can be addressed by just change in food habits. So we had him in this same program, and so I was just trying to understand why this. I mean, everyone has their own hypothesis and own reasons for that. So he makes a reason that the gut microbiota, certain things, certain proteins that are produced, they are analogous to amyloid beta in the brain. So something like that. I forget the exact analogy he draws. So over to you, Manjari, to finally take the program to closure. I enjoyed my interaction with my guru, my mentor, and it was probably the longest program that we had in this series. And why not? Because 7 months we have completed today. I mean, numbers are numbers, but still they are important.
Thank you, sir. If anybody else is having any questions. So I think there are no questions. So first of all, I'd like to thank and congratulate Pooja for presenting and telling us about the translation in such a beautiful manner so that any non-biologist can understand it. And after that, I will also like to thank Dr. Amit Ghosh for extrapolating this talk towards the understanding of the molecular mechanism and how we can try to hypothesize some scientific problems by looking into the animal model, also for doing some human studies, and that can be beneficial for future. I would say that our lab will be that which can answer your questions, and I'll be happy if that happens. With that, I'll be saying good night to all of you, and thank you for joining us. And we'll be meeting again on the 22nd for another biology series. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Akshay, for having me. Good night.
Thanks for coming, sir. Thanks a lot.